Okay, so today is June 6th, right? Monday. It's 9 p.m. my time. As Adam pointed out to me, it is 9 p.m. Easter time. I made that mistake in an email earlier today. So we have a couple of new folks with us. Tom Woods, who looks like his his microphone might have just come on.
I think I'm here now.
Awesome. Okay. So we have Tom Woods. And I'm going to give Tom a little bit of an intro here. Here's the things that I know about Tom. Tom got started with the ZX81, and I'll let him give you the sort of the full story there. He wrote a database program for the ZX81, which then later got ported to later ported it to the 2068, and he was one of the folks who was heavily involved in a magazine called SyncWare News, which was started by Fred Nackbauer, who was really into the ZX81 stuff. It's really into it. Produced a lot of interesting programs. And
well, Fred also wrote the book, right? The beginning book, like the part one of this book.
That's Fred Blackman, a different Fred.
Oh,
yes.
It's a Fred. There's the Jeffs, there's a Tim's. Okay, I don't know.
Freds, the Tims, they all run together. Well, and so actually, on one iteration of at one point in time in SyncWare News, it was Tom Woods, Tom Bent, and Fred Nackbauer who were involved in publishing this thing. And SyncWare News was a little bit more of a technical type of publication for the Timex. John Oliger's TI 9918 video chip expansion for the ZX81 was published in SyncWare News, and Fred wrote some of the software for it. So it was a very sort of collaborative group of folks. And I'll allude to this later. We'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I finally managed to come into an almost complete collection of SyncWare News magazines, and they're now uploaded to archive.org. So with the exception of the first year, we now have a complete set of just really wonderful magazines and articles. So Tom, I'm going to put you on the spotlight here and let you talk a little bit about yourself.
Well, okay. Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone. I don't know if any of you are former customers or not, but I certainly did have a lot of them. It was back in 1980 that I got started. I was an amateur astronomer and was interested in building telescopes. And I got an idea for a different design of a telescope, and was talking to a friend of mine who was a math teacher in the local high school, who said, "Ooh, it sounds like you need a computer for this." And that literally was the first time personal computers ever entered into my life. I saw the ads for the ZX81, and somehow I missed the ZX80. My neighbor had one, and he showed me his, but I got started with the ZX81, and it was a kit, and I saved my money. And at the time, it was near Christmas, and I was making Christmas wreaths to earn extra money to pay taxes and pay for Christmas presents and insurance bills that come due. And so I made a few extra wreaths and was able to buy myself a kit, and that was my Christmas present for the year. I put it together. First, it didn't work, and went back and resoldered everything, and saw that little K down at the bottom of the screen, and I thought, boy, I've got a lot to learn about this machine. So that's really how I got started. I guess I kind of picked up programming naturally. I learned from the ZX81 manual, which I thought was just an excellent book teaching how to program. Where was I going with this? I never did build my new telescope, but in the package that the computer came in, there was a monthly magazine, which I can't remember the name of it now. You might remember.
I think that was Syntax CX80, maybe.
No.
No, okay.
It wasn't. It was not Sync magazine. That was
Syntax.
Sync magazine. That was the big Syntax. That's the one. Yeah. It came as a free copy, and in the back there were classified ads and people selling different programs and selling. Well, there really wasn't a lot to sell back then. There were very few ads. But I looked at those ads and I thought, geez, I could probably do this. So that's what I did. I came out with programs that were all devoted to teaching people how to learn to program. I figured that was what people really wanted to know, especially if they had built a computer themselves. So that every single one of my products focused on the how to learn aspects of, or not the how to learn, but how to program, how to interface, that sort of thing with the ZX81. And it proved to be a good strategy.
I can attest to that because the manual for ZX Profile is fantastic. I mean, it talks about how to use it as a database, but then it also talks about how to, extend it and make it, even more powerful, or just make it your own.
Yeah, and almost half the book was talking about why it works the way it does, and how the lines of programming work. I had made I had one of those aha moments when I learned to program in machine language. And the first thing I did was add 1 and 1 together and get the answer of 2. And it was where I expected the answer to be. And from there, I was able to write a search routine that could search through the 16 kilobytes of data that the computer stored, and I could do it in the blink of an eye. And that really made ZX Profile ahead of virtually all the other competition.
So where did you learn to program machine language? From the manual or from other sources?
Well, one of the books that I had was Programming the Z80, which was a big, thick book. And I think it was written by somebody named Rodney Zacks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I picked it up at a Radio Shack. I ran into the owner of the Radio Shack store that I used to stop at, and he remembered me. He said, "Oh, you were one of my best customers," because I was always buying parts and books and computer type gadgets from him. But yeah, Radio Shack is long gone now. I kind of miss them.
Yeah, exactly.
That was how I did it. They had every instruction written out, and they explained how the registers were affected and the flags, and I was able to piece it all together by myself.
Oh my! Wow. Yeah. The Rodney Zacks book is very good. So, how did you come to get involved in SyncWare News?
Well, that didn't happen for a long time.
Right.
I can't remember the sequence. It was after Timex, or maybe it wasn't. It must have been right around the time that Timex got out of the computer business. And Fred was having a hard time keeping his little publication going. And I always liked that publication. It had a lot of technical stuff in it, like you mentioned, that I appreciated. And I had some experience with publishing my own things. I had some newsletters for various computer programs. And so we decided that we would try me on the publishing end and him providing the editorial content. And meanwhile, he wanted to reprint all of his old volume ones, and that turned into a major undertaking. The SyncWare News Volume 1, do you have any copies of that?
Not a one.
It's a big book. It's a thick bound copy with kind of a tan cover.
Yeah.
Called SyncWare News Volume 1. You should look for it. I'm sure there are copies floating around still.
One showed up on eBay a while ago, and
Yeah,
I missed it.
I was going to say, I was just looking, and I do not have any Volume 1s. I actually have just very few copies of the other volumes as well. But that was a major undertaking, and it had some of our best stuff in it, and almost all of it came from Fred.
Mm-hmm.
Fred lived in California, and then he moved up to Canada and was living in British Columbia. So we were communicating back and forth across the country. Of course, nowadays it would be nothing, but back then it was a big deal. You had to mail everything back and forth, and it would always take a long time.
Right. You guys probably didn't have, I mean, let's see, in 84, 85, there was some email through maybe CompuServe or something like that, but it sounds like you guys were sending back.
We didn't have modems or CompuServe or anything. We had ZX81s, remember? That was what.
And you made a bunch of other things, like you made a little 32K cartridge for the 2068.
I did. In fact, I have one right here.
Oh my!
I'll hold it up so you can see it. I believe this is a John Ollinger board. He made a bunch of boards for me.
Oh.
This had one with a battery, and it was for the 2068, and you put it in the cartridge slot, and you could put static RAM chips in the sockets.
Yeah.
You could also put EPROMs, and I had CX Profile Profile 2068 on the EPROM. This is one that had. I'm not sure who made this board. Wait a minute, maybe it actually says on here. Oh, it's made by Tom Bent.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he served as the editor of SyncWare News, but he came along after Fred and I got started.
Yeah.
This was the 2068 toolkit, which had a lot of renumbering type routines and things like that. I can tell you a funny story about those static RAM boards. It was Tom Bent really did all the development on that, and he would make them, and he had figured out how to use low power static RAMs and calculated that the battery life would be something on the order of 50 years before the battery went dead. And I got it and plugged it in, and 3 days later, the battery was dead. So I sent it back to him, and he went over it and tried to figure out what was wrong. And he said, this thing's running fine. There's not a thing wrong with it. So we got another one. We put it back in my computer. Same problem. The battery went dead. This went back and forth about 5 times before I finally discovered what the problem was. And in the 2068, there was a cover that came down and closed over the board.
Yeah.
And he had his computer opened. So the cover wasn't screwed down. You know, that was something that all of us had in common. We never had a computer that actually looked like the original computer. And I bet you were the same way. Yes. But 2068 actually was screwed down and it had a cover, and I would close it, and it turned out that the battery arm, or the connector for the top of the battery, would rub against the reflective coating on the inside of the plastic cover, and it would short the battery out.
Oh, that's
And so
great.
the battery went dead. And so we fix it very easily by putting a little piece of electrical tape on top of the battery connector, and it solved the problem.
Fantastic.
But it's kind of
And
a
it's still
funny,
working to this day, right?
say that again.
It's still working to this day, right? 50 years later? I guess it's only 40 years
Well,
later.
unfortunately, I don't have one with anything in it. I wish I had one that I could test, just to see how accurate Tom's prediction was. But,
Well, they never seem to take into account the shelf life of a battery, the self-discharge rate.
well, that's true. But, and lithium batteries are notorious for that, especially those early ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that was a real popular item, and it had a lot of utility.
I bet. Yeah. So someone did a re-engineering, reinvented the wheel, as it were. And now I'm making a couple different varieties of the same sort of thing, but with EEPROMs, and I haven't tried it out yet with a static memory, but it should work. I just don't have the battery hooked up on my my version. But and people are still, crazy as it is, it's hard as to imagine, people are still interested in getting like a Spectrum ROM on the cartridge.
I've moved on. I look at all this. I had a closet full of old Timex stuff, and it's all sitting here, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't even have a monitor that can look at the video anymore.
The new I have a newer LCD screen, and it's like a 12 or maybe 13 inch, and it has a composite video input, but as you may recall, the composite video signal from the 2068 is a little less than pretty.
Well, it is, and it also requires a lot of soldering to make it so that it's there. I mean, it doesn't exist. There's a TV channel 3 and channel 4. And
Oh, you're talking about with the ZX81?
yeah,
So there's a guy in Germany, there's a bunch of folks, but there's a guy in Germany in particular who devised a little circuit, and it is small enough to fit inside the modulator case. So that's what he recommends that people do is, open up the modulator, hollow it out, and stick in this circuit, and it spits out a beautiful composite signal from the ZX81 or the 1000. I mean, it's
Yeah, I've actually just tapped off the video going into the modulator. Works just fine, just a single wire. I've seen people say you need a transistor, but no, you don't.
Well, it depends upon the ULA, because there's a back porch problem in terms of setting black levels. You know that, Jeff, about black levels.
Sure, but we worry about that in broadcast, but usually for these cheap computers, it's not an issue.
Yeah. So, Tom, after the heyday, the SyncWare news, and you transitioned to the PC and did a database called PC Findex, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, it was called Findex.
Findex.
And basically it was a profile 2068 adapted for DOS.
Okay. And then, so after that, what happened?
Well, it was kind of a sad tale of woe. In the Timex world, I was a big fish, and
Yes.
I had a lot of customers, and I did a lot of business and made a very good living. But I was the last guy on the block when I moved over to the PC.
Mm.
I had done a couple of programs besides FindX. That one was called Gravitator, that simulated the motion of stars and massive bodies as they are affecting each other's gravity. And you could watch stars dance around in 3D on the screen.
Oh, wow.
And that was taken up by a publisher, and he did a pretty good job for me selling it. It ended up selling to a lot of colleges and in astronomy classes. And that did well. I also did a lot of writing. I've always been kind of a freelance writer. And I wrote for several computer magazines that were kind of like the old Sync magazine. They were sort of a technical and programming type of magazine of interest to hobbyists. And there was one, wish I could remember the name of it now, but they actually made me a contributing editor, and I wrote regularly for them for several years.
Oh, wow.
I never could crack the software market, and nobody wanted FindX. It just was not in demand. The only people that bought it were old Timex customers that liked it and wanted, and they themselves had moved to the PC and wanted something like it.
Interesting. And are you still doing the lapidary? The making the jewelry? I mean, the last time we talked, you were doing that.
Yeah, I'm doing that now. That's sort of a retirement income for me now. I was a teacher for many years, and I worked in the Department of Corrections for the state of Vermont, and we had a high school there, and I was there for 15 years before I retired. And I had gotten into rock hounding and making, and faceting. And I taught myself how to facet gemstones, but soon was collecting more gemstones than I knew what to do with, and I couldn't afford to buy settings for them all. So I thought, well, if I can make my own faceted stones, I ought to be able to make my own settings. So I took a class at a local craft school and have been involved with that school ever since.
So once an educator, always an educator.
I think it took me a while to discover that, but yeah, when I was going back to school let me back up. When I was 18, I went to the University of Delaware for one semester and dropped out before I flunked out. And, I was 35 when I went back to school and got a degree in teaching.
Oh, cool.
But one thing that Vermont offered was a course called Assessment of Prior Learning, and if you could document your prior learning experiences and tie them into courses, you could get credits for that, and it would reduce what would be required to get a degree. And that was the discovery that I made, is that I had always been a teacher. Even back in the early ZX81 days, that's what I was doing. I was teaching people how to program.
Yeah.
And have been doing it ever since, and I'm still teaching. I teach jewelry making courses at the Littleton Studio School now, which is Littleton, New Hampshire, the next town south of me.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's cool.
I have a couple of questions.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I was looking at David's website, and I think these programs, they're all listed as by you, but I'm not sure. Like, if I rattled off a couple titles, would you tell me if these are by you?
I'll try.
All right. Did you write Mad Dog Tank Blaster?
Oh, I sure did.
Oh, well, let's get started with that. Can you tell us about that? It's for the 1000.
Well, that was one of my main interests, was shoot 'em up type games back then. And I had a lot of fun making Mad Dog Tank Blaster. What it was a grid work, and you could move a square in between in through the grid. And meanwhile, there was another thing that was moving around, and it would shoot at you. And what you had to do is, before you got shot yourself, you had to get right up next to this thing and plant a landmine for it to run over. And that way you would blow it up. But again, that was, that it was all about the explanation of how it worked. It was a printed program listing. I don't think I ever sold cassettes of it, but people would enter that in themselves, and then they'd get a good explanation of what every program line did.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm looking at David's site, and he says it was sold for $6.95, but David's site, who can trust that place?
Yeah, no, that's what it was. It was the $6.95 program listing, and they were all mimeograph sheets.
Oh, that's and I won't get into it really, but on other platforms that they would sell listings for like $20 sometimes back in the early days.
Oh no, the Sinclairs were cheap.
Yeah, that's neat. Some other program listings that I see here are, excuse me, not listings, but software titles. I'm going to list them all, and then whatever you want to talk about, just maybe you can do that. Morse code translator, a pseudoscope for a TS 2068, a game that's an ecology program from Scientific American called WATOR, something like that.
WATOR.
WATOR? Okay.
WATOR.
I published that, but I didn't write it. That was a Fred Nachbar program.
Okay. And finally, there's a couple other things, but another one that's very interesting to me is Extended Basic that adds 22 commands for the 1000, if that's also by you.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not sure if all of them are there, but
that might have been a Fred Nachbauer.
Okay.
If it was for the 1000, it might have been Fred. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was one that would add more commands. You would issue a go sub-zero command in BASIC, and then it would go off into machine language and do odd things. And I wonder if that was it.
Okay. All right. Well, could you tell me, maybe, I'm quite interested in hearing about the pseudoscope. How did that work?
Well, it mimicked the action of a oscilloscope. It was tied to it only worked digitally, so you got a high or a low, and a line would scroll horizontally across the screen and would show if bits were high or low.
Was it actually fast enough to use as a scope, or was it just to tell if something was high or low?
It would do real time, and it could be pretty fast. I'd never really timed it, so I don't know how fast it would go, but it had no problem registering. That was done in machine code, as I recall, and it was quite fast. But I came out with a product called the I/O port, and John Oliver made the board for me, and it was just a simple parallel port. And I had developed several programs, Pseudoscope was one of them, that supported that board. It turned out to be a very handy board. I used that for a lot of my own personal projects.
Right, that was with the 8255, right? If I recall correctly. That was the Intel parallel port chip.
No, it wasn't. It was done with, I wonder if I have one of those things here.
Let me pull this out of my hat.
Well, I have them somewhere, but I don't have it right in front of me.
Okay.
It literally decoded port DF hex.
Okay.
And the IO line would activate, and you would read or write to the port, and it had a latch on it, so it would hold the value that you put there.
Very cool.
but
Very
it didn't.
cool.
It did not use any serial I/O.
Okay.
Just what the Z80 was capable of doing by itself.
Wow. Wow. In between all the other things it was doing.
Well, no, not really. It only did it when you told it to do it, and you only had limited opportunities.
Right. Does anybody have any other questions for Tom?
I would like to follow up with that program that you wrote for Scientific American. You were saying the ecology program. Could you tell me a little about that one? Because I think it's pretty neat to see a program written or published in Scientific American. I guess it was a basic listing in 1984.
I don't think. Well, first of all, Fred Nachbar was the one that wrote that program. And I think that he probably was inspired by that Scientific American article, and he wrote his own. There was a series of articles written by a guy named A.K. Dudney, and he wrote a regular column in Scientific American where he would kind of bridge the gap between science and computer software. And he was actually the one that inspired me to write my gravity simulation program. He basically outlined what a program needed to do in order to calculate all that. And I took it from there. And I believe he did the same thing with Fred and the Wator program. Basically, it was a sharks and fishes type program where there were predators and prey. And you could watch the populations rise and fall as as the environment changed.
Sounds very interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Sounds like an early life program. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those columns. It was maybe Amateur Scientist or something like that. Those were fantastic.
Well, that might have been it. Yeah,
Yeah. Those are great columns.
they really were.
Tom, I cannot thank you enough, and I hope you'll come back because I'm sure I have lots of other questions to ask you.
Well, he's going to have to put up all of his stuff for auction here.
Because right. Well, as you said, you were a big fish, and you have a very big footprint in the Sinclair world at that time. And so I'll give one example. So when Tom wrote ZX Profile for the 2068, he also wrote a printer driver for his program, and it was about 117 bytes worth of code. And some other folks, I don't recall if you mentioned this in the manual. I don't have the manual in front of me, but some other folks wrote about taking that 117 bytes and extracting it and just turning it into a generalized printer driver for the 2068. So you could, use it to print from TazWord or MScript or, any other program to a larger printer than the 2040 to, an 80 column printer or something like that. And actually that was one of the articles in SyncWare that I just indexed a couple days ago, was about that little tiny piece of code that Tom wrote, which is a pretty nifty thing.
Well, you could do pretty amazing things with machine code back in the day.
Yeah.
We didn't have all this baggage of compilers and other languages that are built on top of other languages, and having to carry all of that baggage with a new application like we do today. But 100 bytes, you could move the world.
Yeah.
I wonder, Tom, when you were selling those printed listings, did you print them on dark red paper so people couldn't Xerox them?
No,
That's what we used to
in
do.
fact, back then people were very worried about copying and losing money because of illicit software copies. But that I had the opinion that if the more I could get out there, the better off I'd be. And so it never bothered me if anyone was lifting a copy. It was only a $3.95 heist. You know, I wasn't going to go broke because somebody had taken my program. Those were actually mimeographed. I had one of the first pieces of equipment that I bought for my business was a mimeograph machine, believe it or not.
I remember the smell.
Yeah, that was how far back it was.
So Tom, someone wanted to know, you said that you wrote a broad range of software, and how did you decide what to program? How did you decide what you were going to work on?
I kind of just followed my nose. You know, I knew that people wanted to learn how to program. And so if I got interested in something and would take the time to figure out how to do it, I assumed that there were probably other people that were interested in the same thing. So I just came out with the types of programs that I was interested in, and I hoped that other people would be interested too. You know, the database seemed almost like a no-brainer. I mean, at that time, everybody was wondering, what am I going to do with this computer? How can we put these things to work? And you know, it was a real time of exploration. Everybody was exploring these newfangled devices that were looking for a problem to solve. And it seemed to me that a database would be a good way of doing it. One interesting thing about my development of that was I knew nothing about databases when I got started doing it. It was my ignorance that allowed me the creativity to do what I did. You know, back then, everybody was talking about relational databases and having fields with fixed lengths and that sort of thing. And it wasn't a database if it didn't have those features. And all of a sudden, I'm talking about something that's free form, that you can have any number of bytes in a record, and it was limited only by the size of your RAM. And how do you access information like that? I'm kind of kicking myself now, because had I maybe been a little more persistent, I could have been the next Google, because I'm sure that Google searches are the same way ZX Profile was searching. It's just doing it on a larger scale.
With many more computers.
It would take a lot of ZX81s to do that.
We'll let them use 2068s.
So I'm curious, how many people are watching right now? And of those people that are watching, how many are still using their Timex Sinclair computers?
Well, we have 16 people on tonight, and then a bunch of folks will watch it, later. But yeah, Adam held his hand up. I have mine sitting just to the right of my, my Macintosh, and I use it all the time. I have to admit that, Profile is one of my favorite programs to play with, just because I like, puttering with it.
That's good to know. It's very rewarding to hear that.
Well, I have a question for you then, David. Like, how do you putter around with it? What do you do? You're not running your website off of it, so.
No, I'm not. But I do things like plug in my record collection. Instead of putting it into Discogs, I put it into the 2068.
What do you use for a keyboard?
Well, it's funny you should ask, because during the pandemic, I designed a circuit board that fits into the hole where the original keyboard goes, and it's got full size switches, and there are companies that will custom print keycaps for you now. And so I designed some keycaps with all the 2068 logos on the little markings on them. So I have this full size keyboard sticking out of the where the little plastic keys were.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, everybody complained about the keyboard. I have my ZX81 here. I was going to hold it up so you can see it. And you may remember the keyboard that this has.
Mhm. Oh, you've got an easy key. Wow.
It's an easy key. This is a byte back 64K RAM pack.
Wow. That's
Hey, well,
fantastic.
you're saying wow, but I don't know what the hell I'm looking at.
Okay, so there was a guy in suburban Boston who was part of the Boston Timex Sinclair user group who came out with that keyboard that you see. I don't know where he had it manufactured, but it uses these little sort of plastic like calculator keys. And that was the big one. And there was a smaller one that had fewer keys. I want to say his name was, it was David something. His last name will come to me. But yeah, he sold it was called the Easy Key 60, I think is the one you have, Tom. And there was an Easy Key 44. And it, it gave you a larger keyboard. Let's put it that way. I won't say it's full-size keys, probably not full motion, but it gave you a larger keyboard.
Tom, if you get a chance, I'm not sure, maybe David can tell us if there's quality pictures of that. If there's not, maybe you can take some and send them off to David and put them on his site, because that kind of stuff seems pretty rare. It
is pretty rare. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's not a lot of folks.
Yeah, I could do that.
That would be fantastic. Yeah.
I'll want to clean the dust off of it, but
Are you saying you don't use it every day?
this has been in a closet for 30 years at least.
Tom, just FYI, Tom, the that unstructured database thing's a thing these days. That no SQL, no SQL databases is just a thing you can get in the cloud, completely unstructured, variable number of columns. Yeah, it's a modern thing. It's non-relational databases. It's a service you can get online and you can run it on your machine.
And there I was, 30 years ahead of my time.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I've noticed I've seen AK-ROM emulators for Android devices now. Has anybody played with one of those?
Right. So there's a ZX something or other emulator for the iPhone and I suppose the iPad, and then also there's emulators that run on the Android. I have the iPhone one, and so I can fire up a ZX81 on my little iPhone.
Oh, is that actually allowed on the Apple Store because the ROM is freely distributable nowadays? Is that why?
I don't know how they get around it, but it is still updated.
Okay.
Who's going to complain?
Well, Apple
Yeah.
will take you down.
Yeah.
Who would complain about it though?
Well, it's the fact that you can actually type a program into it and run it. That's one of the things that they get upset about. Apparently, Apple does. It's part of their.
Yeah, they seem to like to control the software that runs.
Yeah. So it looks like I have mine set with the Timex Sinclair 1500 keyboard. I mean, the settings on this thing are a bit absurd. The keyboard's even smaller.
It probably runs faster than the original, though.
It does. It does.
I mean, you can run a full emulation in your browser these days. I've right the way to run a Windows emulation in your browser. The browser got so quick. Including the ZX, the JONT1 or JT1 or whatever it's called. That's a ZX emulator in the browser.
Yep. There's a Spectrum emulator in the browser. Yeah.
In which browser?
I'm sorry?
In which browser is it in?
Oh, like Chrome or Firefox or Internet Explorer or Edge.
No kidding.
Yeah,
I'm gonna look for that.
It's written in JavaScript, of all things. It's astounding.
Well, I believe it. That's a nice language.
It's pretty amazing.
There was another question that was asked. Tom, that hasn't come up yet in the chat. Someone had asked if you ever finished your telescope, and if you did, what size was it?
It was a Newtonian reflector that I built, and I did build it, but I got hung up on problems with the mount. And I can tell you another funny story. There was one of the comets that was lighting up the sky, well, sort of lighting up the sky, and I had a friend of mine over who was a science teacher in the nearby high school, and he was looking through my telescope trying to find the comet. Meanwhile, I'm looking in the opposite direction, and I saw the strangest stellar object I've ever seen in my life. It was a star that got brighter and brighter and brighter until it was the brightest star in the sky, and then it dimmed.
Oh, wow.
And within the course of about a minute, it was gone. I thought that it was a X-ray burst, something or other, because I had just been reading about these things in Astronomy magazine. And I wrote to the editor of the magazine saying, what did I see? And he explained that it was most likely a point meteor, which is a meteor that is traveling straight at you. And if it reached the Earth, it would land at your feet. And that's why it remained motionless in the sky. It just got brighter and brighter and then dimmed.
Burned out.
But it kind of taught me something about telescopes. And that is that you can have the most powerful telescope in the world, but if you're looking in the wrong direction, you ain't going to see nothing. So I get most of my enjoyment looking at the sky just with the naked eye.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
My favorite media thing is they were using them for in the wilderness. They're using them for transmission, and so they broadcast up in the sky. And when a micrometeor comes through, it creates an ionized trail, and they can actually transmit into that trail. It'll go down the trail, and they can pick it up from elsewhere. So they're using that for environmental monitoring up in the sort of cold north of Canada, and using the meteor trails, micrometeor trails, as the transmission medium.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Military was actually using that for a little while for communications with remote sites as well.
Oh, cool.
So they're actually using it to communicate?
Yeah, they would essentially use it as like an ionospheric layer.
Oh, huh.
This is why I attend these meetings, because yeah, we talk about the Sinclair, but what else do I learn?
Right. We learn all sorts of other things. I want to introduce one of our other guests. It's Wes. Wes, I'm hoping I'm not going to butcher your last name.
Everybody does. It's okay.
So, Wes, you worked at IBM for a few years, and wrote a few articles about various things. One of the things, by the way, that was in that recent batch of SyncWare news was a 64-column basic that you wrote. Mm-hmm. And this is a little machine language program that would you type it into your computer, and then you could use 64 columns from basic. And this was akin to, but not the same as, the Zebra's OS 64 cartridge. Solved the same sort of problem in a different way, and had some interesting limitations from what I was reading in your article. And then one of the other things that you wrote was a 5-part series of articles trying to reverse engineer how the Timex 2068 bank switching mechanism should have worked. Is that a fair description?
Yes, that was pretty much the basic idea. I pretty much disassembled the whole thing and got a fairly decent picture of how it was working. I had been working at the time on actually building some bank switching hardware. What I was doing was the actual portion of the Timex code that actually would have accessed their hardware was a small portion of code that was always in RAM memory. It was not in the ROMs. So it was in a chunk that was, depending on how the bank switching was done, it could have been located in 2 places in memory. But in any case, since it was in RAM, I was able to replace that and allow, I was working on the bank switching to actually work hardware of my own. And then I actually got some of it working. I was able to get the memory, the extra banks to switch. That was around the time I was getting more used to a PCXT I had gotten, and I had didn't really do a lot with it once I had it working. But in any case, yes, there was the 5-part series, and I remember, I don't know whether it was was it Tom we were just speaking to that I had spoken to, or it was the other, I believe it was the other gentleman involved with SyncWare News. He had been interested in getting a follow-up article on that bank switching hardware, which never quite got completed. So that part never saw the light of day.
So you're now ready to share those schematics, right?
If I could find them, I probably wouldn't have a problem with that. Seriously, it was a fun thing. Now, what happened to me at the time, I built a lot of hardware, did a lot of programming, but I was working for IBM at the time. And okay, when you're working for a company that had been sued as many times as they were extraordinarily picky about any legal type of problems. And that would include any employee of their own producing any equipment, any product for any computer, including their own.
Yeah.
So basically the things that I did, I gave away. I mean, I did it for the love of it. I had a lot of fun with it, but I gave them away, as you saw the one little article with the 64 column basic, or this thing with the bank switching. I'm sure I could have written something up and sold it, but I gave it away.
And your local user group was pretty active. And you guys, had a newsletter for a long time, and it was a really nice newsletter from the few issues I've seen.
It was a wonderful bunch of people. You would think that having people writing good articles was the important thing, but I really think that the person who is worth their weight in gold is the person who is committed to publishing the thing. Absolutely, seriously. I mean, that is something that a person is committed to long term. If I was going to build a project and say publish it in that newsletter or in some other place, I could do that on my whim, on my schedule. But if you are publishing something, you are truly committed. I mean, these are people who I hold in awe. They are just amazing people, and we had people like that in our club.
Yeah,
where was it?
They were the most valuable people I could imagine.
Wes, what was the name of your group, and where were you guys?
It was okay. The club was called SYNCUS, Sinclair Computer User Society, and it was in the Binghamton area, Binghamton, New York area. And the newsletter was called SYNCUS News. And yeah, we published it for years and had a lot of fun with it. So that was one of my outlets, but some of the larger things I tried publishing elsewhere and had some fun with that too. The wonderful thing about them really was the camaraderie, because in pretty much every article I did, including the ones that were at SyncWare News, and that was helpful because it got a lot of exposure, I would have my name, my address, and my phone number. And I invited people to call me, and I got a lot of calls. And this was back when you had to really pay real money to make a long distance call. And I had all kinds of people calling up, and we had just the most wonderful conversations. I mean, something like what we're doing here, but people are actually having to pay some real money to do it.
Yeah, that was expensive back then.
And again, so many wonderful experiences. There was a fellow, I don't know if you have met Doug Dewey. He was from the Triangle Sinclair user group that was in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of time on the phone. He had done one of the first Spectrum emulators. And we spent a lot of time working together on improving that thing. I showed him a way that you could use Spectrum ROMs. The original ones were using an EEPROM that you had to modify it to plug into the 2068 cartridge port so that it would boot up as a Spectrum. And I found out that if you just put a Spectrum ROM in there, which it wouldn't work if you just had that Spectrum ROM in the memory space. But if you did an out command to switch in that memory chip into the low memory space, the computer would crash, but it would crash in a controlled way so that you could type a rand user 0 and reboot it as a Spectrum. Oh. And so that was how a lot of these emulators went after that. So in any case, we did a lot of little things like that. I shouldn't babble on and on about that, but we just had a lot of fun coming up with ideas. And again, I couldn't make things and sell them, so I did it for the fun of it, gave it away, and then other people got some use out of it. So it was a great experience for me. I got a lot of free phone calls and a lot of conversation. Other people paid for that, so that was the payment for me. I had a wonderful time.
Keith wants to know if your bank switching software, the bank switch your hardware automatically or was manually switched. I'm assuming it was when you issued a command, it would automatically switch to different banks.
What happened was there was bank switching software built into the 2068 that would have switched the memory banks that Timex would someday build. It was a very weird bank switching system. It looks like it was made to be built into a very small integrated circuit package. It worked 4 bits at a time instead of 8 bits at a time, as you would have normally in a computer like that. So I suspect it was intended to go into a chip that didn't have enough pins to it that you could put 8 bits into it. So it was very weird, and it would to implement it in hardware would be very complex. And what I did was I just built my own hardware that used the Timex software there. So if you used the Timex, the built-in Timex API that would do the bank switching,
mm-hmm.
It would talk to my hardware. It would switch the chunks of memory
in and
out.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And the way to do it was because the actual memory or the actual code that switched the hardware was very small. It was just, I don't know, probably 40, 50, 60 bytes. It was very small, and that was in RAM. And so that could be written over. And I would have to initialize the hardware. You mentioned the 8255s a bit ago, the Intel. It was based on those, so it needed some initialization code to put it in the right mode. And then once that was done, I could overwrite the memory with the code that would talk to these 8255s, and I had the ability to do bank switching. Again, if you are interested in this, I can see if I can find it. I can do some archaeology. I went up to the attic today and actually pulled up some of the gadgets that I had built at the time. I don't know if we're looking to see those or whether it'll even be visible in front of the little camera here. But I kind of basically know where all these notes would be. So if someone is actually interested in that, I think someone asked about that, I could try to locate it.
Well, Wes. Wes, I read those articles that you made back then with keen interest because obviously it was interesting to see how Timex was going to do that, right? I mean, bank switching at that time was, pretty cutting edge. I think there really wasn't a lot of machines at that point that were doing that. I mean, it kind of became much more common not that many years later, right, for a lot of machines. But the way Timex was doing it, and I think that was one reason why they fell so behind in the development of the 2068, is because they were trying to get that part of it to work right, and that's why they fell behind schedule. So probably the code, as some of you probably know, the code that exists in the 2068, it's not really fully baked, right? I mean, that's why all the EEPROMs inside the 2068s are socketed, because I imagine at some point they were going to send out chips to people to, okay, well, here's the final rev, or here's a good version of it. That's kind of another reason why I call it the upside down board that's in the 2068. It's soldered upside down on top of a 244 chip that would have just been there to add an extra. I don't think that does. Maybe that does something with the bank switching. I can't remember exactly what it, because it wires up to some pins around the SCLD in there. And but anyway, I mean, I would for one be interested, and I'm sure it looks like a few of the other folks here would certainly be interested in that. I mean, there's always kind of been a cool idea to have actually, somebody build the bus expansion unit. But I don't think anybody really has any kind of schematics of, what Timex was planning to do in there. I do kind of understand there would have been like expansion slots, kind of like in a PC, that you could put cards into, and it would have its own power supply, and I think it was going to have a printer interface and all the kinds of things like that. But and then the microdrive, I think the microdrive stuff would have been in there as well. Yeah, I mean, I certainly would be interested in, like I said, I learned a lot from those articles. So kudos to you for, I mean, that took a lot of time and effort, I'm sure, to delve into the details of that. But, like you said, the code in the RAM, I think, it probably comes out of the ROM, right? It copies that into RAM.
Yes.
So there's some code in the ROM already, but like I said, all that's really not baked. It was kind of half baked when they shipped the 2068 out to everybody. So,
And
One-
to Carl's point, that's right, Jeff. But to Carl's point, I want to preserve everything that we can preserve. So if you want to share it, Wes, I want to preserve it. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, sorry. As a hardware geek, Wes, did you implement that convoluted nibble-based interface in your 8255 with a little bit of code to surround it, or did you just, I hope, do away with that mess?
Yes, the nibble-based thing, that's the little bit of code that I said that I overwrote. So that overwrote code that actually wrote along the 8-bit data bus to the 8255. So yes, it was cleaner.
My man.
That other thing, again, it was, I'm presuming the only reason you would produce hardware like that it would seem to be if, again, you had a custom chip that didn't have enough pins that you could put a whole 8-bit word into it. They only had enough for 4, something crazy like that. But no, I tried designing something like that, saw the number of chips that would be involved, and said, this is too much work. We've got to find a better way.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think Timex was, I don't know. I think they kind of bit it off a little bit more than they could chew there, because I don't know, we've never had any of their engineers per se on here, and that would be kind of a wonderful thing to get to. But, I think they were kind of still, trying to fumble around in the dark with that as well, right? Because I mean, like I said, it wasn't really commonplace, so they didn't have a reference to see how somebody else might have done it. And unfortunately, I think Timex had big ambitions there, but they just, like I said, it was a big ask for those engineers to get that done with the bank switching.
Yes. Yeah, and they did it in a time when, let's see, there were other 8-bit personal computers had been on the market for a while. All of a sudden, the IBM PC came out, and the market changed a lot. The lower end computers, they had some severe trouble. So Timex hit the market just a little too late. Again, probably, as you're saying, the extra bank switching code was what sunk them, because if they tried to make something a little closer to the Spectrum, they could have been out so much earlier. They could have had access to all the British software. They could have had a lot more of the American market, possibly could have had the time to then produce a newer version, a better version that could have had the full bank switching later, but not their choice.
Yeah. So since we have a couple hardware folks on here, I have a question from Neil, who has Neil inherited a bunch of hardware from someone whose relative worked at Timex, and so he has a bunch of sort of oddball stuff. And one of the things that he has are 2068 motherboards of different revisions. So he has a revision 03A and a 03D, and he's got this tech guy that he's working with who's trying to figure these things out and get them to work. So Neil wants to know if anybody knows what the difference is between any of the revision boards for the 2068. I want to know too. This is the question for you too, Carl.
Well, the only thing, and I have seen both of those in the wild, right? You open up as many 26 as I've opened up back then for Art Colgate that was doing those the CNC milling machines. He bought a pallet, probably, I don't know, maybe 1,000 2068s from Timex when they were going out. These were like returns or things that were broken. So that's kind of why I had to make my diagnostic cartridge, right? So we needed to test these and make sure that they were viable to be used in his milling machine. So I've opened up quite a bit, and like you said, I have seen the A revs and I have seen the D revs, and I can't really say that I've taken them and putting them next to each other, right, and kind of looked them over. But I think kind of one of the main things that I kind of remember is just some I think there were some bodges that they made on the A's, right, on the circuit board that they fixed right on the later revision board, so that they didn't have to do those excuse me, bodges anymore. And I think they might have moved things around a little bit. I think the EEPROM, not the EEPROM, but the ROM jumpers, the W1, 2, 3, 4 jumpers, I think they changed, they might have moved those locations a little bit, and just some general layout issues. I don't think that was circuitry wise, I don't think there was any change there. There's no added that I can see. There's nothing added or taken away. Unlike the the 1500 boards which you've shown, David. There's definitely been changes there where the original boards were quite costly, I think, because they used a ton of chips, right? And then they really cost reduced those in the later revision boards where they started using the 4-bit memory chips instead of the 1-bys, and then they I think something else we saw in there too that they changed. But anyway, it made it so that they didn't need as probably half as many chips, I think, to build those later 1500s, which I think really were built in Portugal, because that was long after Timex had exited the market. So I don't know why a 1500 would have an 86 board revision. Where are you going to sell? Where are you selling a 1500 in 1986? It's certainly not here. Right, exactly. So, and I'm sure cost had a big thing to do with that. But anyway, the A and the D revs on the 2068, yeah, I'd have to take a look with Ben and see what. But again, I think it's just some bodges that they had, because they both use the upside down board, which I call the upside down board. But so they didn't really fix that. And I think that board was really kind of a temporary solution to some problem that like I said, they needed to get it out by Christmas of '83, right? And that's kind of what they. Okay, well, if we're going to do this and get it out to customers, well, this is what we're going to have to do to it, right? So I think it added a little cost, obviously, because the more somebody's got to touch something, right, that's more money, right? But it's just really unfortunate again that, like I said, I think Timex bit off a lot more than they could, were prepared to chew with the 2068. It was, I give them kudos. They had great ideas and grand plans for it. It would have been it is a great machine from that era, right? I mean, comparatively, it's no VIC 20 or Commodore 64 or 128 per se, but I think they
Carl,
kind of.
it is better than a VIC 20.
It is better than a
Well,
VIC 20.
It is better than a VIC
It is better than a VIC 20.
Well, I don't know about the keyboard, but yeah, you're right. And I think, I think Timex missed the mark with, all the software that Britain had. I mean, I don't know if anybody's watched, there was a documentary / movie called Micromen, right? Which is basically how Sinclair got started and the rivalry that he had with the guy who was working for him, but he actually got pissed off at him and quit, and they got in a fight in a bar, and and anyway, he went to form Acorn Computers, right? Which back at then, I guess the BBC was looking to do a educational series on computers, and they wanted their own computer, right, to go along with this educational series, and they were going to have all these shipped out to all the schools in England because they wanted to be the first country in the world to have computer literacy or something like that in the lower grades, right? And so anyway, it's an interesting movie to watch, but again, Timex, I wish they had something on that, because I really wish I understood and somebody could explain to me what Timex, who made the specs, the specifications for the Timex 2068. What were their grandiose plans for this thing? And some of that we do see realized. Obviously the case design, right, and the keyboard's better. It had a cartridge slot, which a lot of machines back then at that era had. Again, the VIC 20, the Atari 800, all those things had cartridges, and the Timex or the Sinclairs didn't, right? And so for an American market machine, I think they were right in the fact that they were trying to, give the American market what it wanted or what the other computers had so it could compete, right? If they came out with a Sinclair, like the PS2000, like they were originally, well, I don't know if they originally wanted to do that, but, just basically Americanize the British version, right? I think it probably wouldn't have been as big of a hit. Maybe not. Maybe it would have been fine. I mean, obviously it was good enough for the Brits, right? They didn't have cartridges, but they had an add-on later, right? I think the Interface 2 that came out that added cartridge capability. Yeah. And then, Amstrad added bank switching into the Spectrum, right? With the 128 and the later machines. So anyway, I don't know where I was going with all this. I guess it was more towards the revisions of the PCBs in there. But yeah, that's kind of what I've noticed is this just, some placement things are placed a little bit different here and there. So I think, it was just mainly to correct some problems that they had on the AREV board, as far as layout and issues like that.
Microman is available on YouTube, or at least it was a little while ago.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, but it's an interesting watch. I mean, it's got what's his name from I can't remember his name right now, but he was in
he played Frodo.
Right, and he also played in the
Sherlock.
Yeah, Sherlock movies as well. Right.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
And Alexander Armstrong played Sir Clive Sinclair.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was kind of funny because I mean that hairpiece they had on
the hairpiece was terrible.
I was like,
they needed better makeup for that.
Yeah,
production.
it was a good show though, but I mean, it was kind of nice to see behind the scenes of what was going on with those guys at that time. So
I hate to say it, but that hairpiece mimics Clive's hair pretty well. So
it does. It's just, I mean, the edges around the top part were just too well formed for me. I don't think people have bald, top caps like.
Yeah. So Tom and Wes, if you guys, feel like sharing anything, I've got a scanner and I live to scan.
All right. I'll do a little archaeology and see what I can do.
Awesome.
And you live to receive scans.
Oh, yes. And so speaking of receiving scans, Tim Swenson sent me a big old pile of scans. One of which he sent me some QL newsletters, and he like completed the collection of one of the newsletters. um, and he had a whole bunch of issues of Cats, which was the newsletter of the Washington, D.C. Capital Area Timex Sinclair user group. Is that right, Tim? And another newsletter, which was actually represented 3 user groups out on the West Coast. It was called Timelines with a Z. And that represented, let me think, Easy.
Peninsula user group, the East Bay user group, and the Silicon Valley user group.
Yeah. And that one's pretty fascinating. They're all fascinating. That's the thing. The thing that kind of struck me as a little different about Timelines is that after a certain point in time, the page numbers, the first couple issues, I think maybe the first year or so, the issues are the page numbers are numbered per issue, and then at a certain point in time, they just started counting up with the page numbers. And so, later on, the page numbers will be for a given issue will be like 253 through 265, which is great because if you're trying to put stuff in sequence, you know what the sequence is. And they one of the issues that Tim scanned was actually just an index of all the prior issues, which is great because it includes all the issues that we don't yet have archived, but we at least know based on these indexes that somebody typed into a Sinclair and printed out on a 2040 printer. We at least know what those articles were and when the issue they appeared in, so we have titles and things. And so Tim has been keeping me busy. Tim also scanned a book of it was written
Games.
Games for the 2000 Timex Sinclair 2000. Right. So this is one of these books that was converted from Games for the Spectrum. And I don't, Tim, I mean, is there anything specific to the 2068? I don't think so. There's not like a sound command or anything in it.
Wow.
When I've looked at when I've looked at not that book in particular, but all of the books I've seen that were converted, well, I take that back. Most of the books, they don't really do anything specific. They're just straight. They usually rename the system and they don't change the programs.
Yeah. And Adam, who was the gentleman that scanned the other book? His name is escaping me now.
Oh goodness.
Was it Louis Floret?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I still got 1 or 2 more that I can scan. I got the astronomy book.
Oh yeah.
Which I heard is fairly rare, but I've had it for years.
Well, and Tom certainly would be interested in the astronomy book, right, Tom?
Yeah.
So basically, the astronomy one was, so there was Celestial Basic by Eric Burgess.
Yeah.
And he actually then specialized it for the 1000. And he basically says, if you want more details, go back to the Celestial Basic, but here's the program for the 1000. Yeah. I also have this one. I don't think you can see it too well.
It's
nice. The ZX81 in Science Teaching. It's a UK book. And it talks about using machine code, and I didn't like the game books. I like the books that use the machines for computation purposes. Yeah. Like the astronomy. And this one is let's take a look at it real quick what some of the chapters are. Let's see real quick. Computation, mathematical modeling, microcomputer timing and control, analog interfacing, machine coding the ZX81, extending the ZX81. So it was designed for teachers to use the ZX81 in class for different computer purposes. The 2 gentlemen are out of the University of Stirling and the Paisley College of Technology. So I found it online somewhere.
The Blad College of Technology.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see those. That'll be
Well, you know,
fantastic.
speaking of astronomy programs, Tim, maybe you could tell us a little about your programs you typed in, like the moon phases and the Galilean moons, the one,
Yeah,
were those
so
for
the Galilean moons, I need to go back and look at because I don't think it's got issues. But I believe I got the original code from one of the astronomy books. It could be from Gene Meus, Meuus, something like that. So basically, he provides the algorithm, and I typed it in. But I need to go back and verify that one. So I went back and looked at my Linux code, which is where it came. I took it from Linux and ported it over to BASIC, and it wasn't quite right either for the date that I used. So I got to go back and look at that. The moon phase, there was actually, I want to say, a couple different moon phases ones. So I've been working on something for, I think I started in 2014. It's kind of a collection of different algorithms. So there's like 4 different ways to do Easter, depending on different people. In fact, one was John Conway, who did the life, came up with a way of doing Easter. There's 4 different ways to do convert from Gregorian date to Julian date. So I think I only found like one way of doing Jupiter, and the moon's to Jupiter. So I convert the C. I need to go back to my original C code and see how it's doing, and then I can make sure that the changes are in the BASIC. Usually it's something like I put a minus sign instead of a plus sign, or something minor like that is how they won't really work. So I need to go back and look at that. Some of my to-do list.
What we need is
you
an
pointed
educator.
out, Adam.
What's that?
Pardon? Yeah.
What did you say?
Said you pointed it out. Adam.
Well, I
this
wanted to
ain't
try it
working.
out. You know, I thought it would be cool, and I was like, wait a minute, that's not where the moons are supposed to be.
At least it looks nice.
It does look nice. Yeah.
It looks nice, but
So-
it doesn't match with reality.
There you go.
Maybe reality is
I need to
broken.
go relook at stuff. Yep. I thought the one that was
Reality
most
is
interesting,
overrated.
the most interesting one I thought of the ZX Zine issue was the fonts for the ZX81.
Yeah.
As long as you're using an emulator, it's such a piece. Well, it's a little tedious, but it's really easy to to change the font. Just basically find the right location, get a hex editor, and plug it in, and you got a whole different font.
Yeah, it reminded me of all those fonts that were, well, I think you mentioned all the fonts that used to be available for the Ataris. I mean, it was just.
Actually, I talked about the Spectrum fonts.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So there was a parallel universe for the Atari folks where there were just scads and scads. I remember downloading tons of these things, different fonts for the Atari 800 XL. Or any of the Ataris, actually. Tim H. I'm going to ask you to unmute. You said you had some stuff to chat about?
Yeah, actually, it links into original Tim's thing on the fonts. Well, partly. There's a GitHub site somewhere that archives a whole pile of fonts for Amstrad CPCs and the original PC and a whole pile of them. There's bitmaps, so you can just go grab them. I'll hunt it down. It's just got like 100 or so old fonts for various systems. But just on that, can I share a screen?
Oh yeah. Oh, let me just make that possible. Oops. Give me just a second. I really should do this at the very beginning, huh? All participants. There we go. All right, hit it.
Right, probably there. So if you can, oh, did I hit share? I didn't. So if you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Is that the Excel one, or do I get the wrong one?
That looks like Excel.
This is
okay.
LCD font.
Yeah. So I did a whole pile of fonts that were the fonts for those little 2x16 line LCDs, and they're 4x20, and there's a whole pile of them. And I did it in Excel, just turned off all the grids, drew them up, and I wrote this in a chat. But who likes to read chats? But really, if you zoom in on it, if I click on here and zoom in, they're actually just done with well, maybe the thing doesn't show it. If you put a 1 here, whoops. You put a 1 there, it turns black, and so it's a really easy way of editing fonts. it's just when conditional formatting. So the formatting sort of says if it's a 1, make it dark gray, and then you create a whole pile of formulas that that then convert that into your binary to drop into your machine code or your assembler or your C code. And I've just got piles and piles of them. I've got a bit obsessed, as I do. And then somewhere down here is the actual, the data that it generates, and it creates this little macro. So it's just done with some formulas originally. Now it's done with.
Do you make that screen a tiny bit bigger? Because I can't see
sorry,
that
Mike.
really. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. So this is just a little macro that expands the stuff out. Yeah. So yeah, the macro is actually at the top. And so and this one does compression so that if it gets duplicate lines, it deals with that. I got quite carried away. But the original idea is that you can draw these fonts up in Excel, and as you see, I've done, I don't know, 20 or so of them, quite a few of them. And yeah, just as a little font editor. I mean, I use Excel for all sorts of things, and that's just one of the use cases.
It wouldn't take much to make that spit out the code for user-defined graphics on the Spectrum or 2068.
100%. That's exactly what this font data is. I mean, this is just, I've formatted it with the word font row, which is a macro and stuff. But easily this could easily be any sort of hex or des or things with the commas, and all you do is then put the C struct around it, or the def bins, or whatever the commands are for whatever the language of choice is. Yeah, so it's super easy to build, and I did a whole heap of them in a. I mean, like I say, this one, there's one where it sort of spits out the sort of the hex of it. But yeah, there's a whole pile, and then this is actually a combination of all those fonts. It's got about 20 or 30 of them. This one does compression, where similar lines are repeated with a RLE, like a run length encoding on it, to sort of fit it into the amount of space I had. But yeah, a wonderful tool for editing things. And yeah, just instead of a custom-made font building tool.
So Adam, you want that so you can start designing fonts for the 2068?
Oh no. I mentioned how I tried designing some fonts on this Commodore 64 back in the day, and I was like, oh, this takes forever. And I was using my little joystick, but moving it around with my button pressed in red when I had to turn it black or whatever. It wasn't for me.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you can also do the opposite, where you can just drop the binary in and then have it draw the pictures of the fonts. So you can sort of see what fonts look like just by lifting all the hex, dropping it into a column, and having the appropriate formulas. And then you can actually visualize fonts that you've got as binary from other places.
Yeah, that's pretty cool little tool. Well, it's not even, I guess it's not technically a tool, because it's really just a spreadsheet. I mean, not just a spreadsheet, I shouldn't say it like that, but yeah. Something I wanted to bring up about fonts is it's not really related to the Timex, but to the Commodore 64. I was an early adapter of GEOS, or GEOS, however you say it, for that system. Yeah. And I was a teenager, and I thought everything should have as many fonts as you could possibly put into your document. So like my Commodore 64's disk drive was already slow enough. And so I was constantly loading fonts in off the disk drive. And so whenever I load a document, it take like 5 minutes to load each of the fonts. And I was like, but it looks so cool. Anyway, that's my story of fonts.
Hey, Ryan, Ray, you have a question. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go ahead, Ryan.
Stuff.
Okay, now we can hear you, Ryan. Can you, Ryan? Well, your mic's on, but you're not making any sound. I think I cut someone else off just before I asked Ryan.
Oh, how's that?
Oh, that sounds good.
Okay. It's the headset. On the font, on the 2068 font thing, back in the day, one of the things I did was I wrote a font editor, and so that you just had a grid on the screen, and you could go around and poke that and do all the characters and save it out, probably just as a code segment and stuff. And that was one of the things I was going to try when I was trying to get out where I can see what I could load off the tape, to see if I could recover it. But I have found a listing, I think.
Oh my, look at that.
And it hasn't faded.
And it has the date. September 4th, 1985. Now, who can remember what they were doing on September 4th, 1985? Ryan can.
Wow, look at that. That's a really good shape for being that old.
I used to make those, and what I would use then use the fonts. I had some program I'd made up. And then I would do these get some images and use the fonts to do the counters.
Oh.
So I do up some little things and find some program that would make some little image and save that out. And yeah, you had all kinds of time back then,
Ryan, our next question for you is, of course, are you going to scan that for me?
Well, my scanner is not.
No, just scan it in parts. Well, we can stitch it together.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know how long it was. I'm hoping this is actually the whole thing. This wouldn't be much to type in. That was my real point, was to get it into, get as much as I could of old stuff in the emulators now.
Maybe you can OCR it.
OCR it, yeah.
Wow, where's the fun in that? Wasn't it about the struggle? I mean,
After the first 100 lines, you're going to want to OCR.
Yeah. I mean, my question to Tim was, I mean, you have all the, I think those are more of the LCD, like you said, those LCD fonts, but it'd be kind of nice to have like different computer fonts in there, what the Atari 400 fonts were, the Atari 800 fonts were. That way you could, just click on that tab and you'd see those, and maybe you could compare them between, well, what does the Timex fonts look like? Because it's not that big of a deal these days to, maybe change those fonts in the ROMs, right?
I don't want Atari fonts on my Timex computer.
Why not,
okay?
man? That'd
Get
be
that out of
awesome.
here.
That
Get
would
it
be
out of here.
But that way at least you could see the other fonts in the one file, and I'm sure that'd be trivial, right, to do in that application, because I don't know, I don't know the 5x7 or whatever all these different computers use. I imagine they can't be, much different than that, right? So I mean, they all probably fit in the same. Because I guess, I know the 2068 has UDGs, right, that you can use to change your built-in fonts, I guess, but the 1000 or the older machines don't, that I recall. So you'd have to change them in the ROM.
Couldn't you change the fonts on an 81 if you had the 64K RAM and it mirrored the ROM into the RAM?
Yep.
Yeah, well then you're doing the same kind of thing, right, where you're changing the ROM contents, right, but you're now it's in RAM. So
but now you can use a huge ROM, and you can we have for the Apple a product that has 32 fonts, and you can just select them at random anytime.
So something like that, that you could make if you want, not to say, obviously Adam doesn't want his Atari fonts on his Timex, but
well, I'm just kidding, of course.
I know,
Computer.
But maybe you want your Timex fonts on your Atari, or vice versa, or something like that. But of course we're just talking Timex primarily here, but it's like, I think it would be cool to use other computers fonts, right, as our default font for the Timex. That kind of would be not something I'm going to do, but it would be kind of cool to try it.
Well, Carl, I think Jeff did that to us. He demoed one version of his FPGA project and used the Commodore 64 fonts.
Okay.
And it was
because I know like horrifying. The last I think they're bigger, right? They're I know the characters seem to be a lot bigger. Yeah. Than the Timex one. So I'm not sure what the is it a 5x8 or 5x7 or 6x8? I don't know, but and I know the Timex at the end of they invert the most significant bit, right, to tell the ROM that, hey, this is the end of that character.
Yep.
So
Yep.
stuff like that, maybe that spreadsheet could take into account.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that if
I'll
you
hunt down I was going to say, I'll hunt down the GitHub with all those classic fonts, and I'll homework. I'll go and see if I can't grab a chunk of them and put them into the sheet so we can do a visualize.
That'd be
Cool.
interesting. Yeah, that'd be cool to see
That'd
them
be
side
fun.
by side. Yeah,
That'd be fun.
because most of them are ASCII, so they'll line up as far as the letters and numbers, right? I think they use the ASCII format, but some computers might not, so that they'd be in different places. A won't be where A is in everybody else's machine, right? So
Yeah.
I did want to
Yeah.
say, Ryan, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did want to, I think it was you who took and disassembled and commented the machine language subroutine that was part of the box trilogy for the Timex 1000 last week or the week
Oh,
before.
well, yeah, it was thankfully short, but
Yeah, it was still pretty cool to see that. You took the time.
I was
like-
well, it sort of was one of those things where there it was. I look at it and I go, oh, dang it, here's the rabbit hole. I can't resist. And it was like, okay, how much do I remember? And so first I said, well, okay, here's a load. And then what's the code? So I just quickly brought up the character set, and sure enough, it was the graphic characters. And I said, okay, here's that's a box corner character. So, okay, if I were going to do it that way, how would I do it? And then I started looking at the code. I said, okay, yeah, it's marching through screen memory here and doing its thing. So it wasn't that hard really. And so it was real fun to get back into, not that I did a lot ever, but some Z80 assembler, which that's the other one I gotta find is I'd made some little, it wasn't an assembler, it was sort of this fancy loader, because I was playing around with machine code, and if you had a bit of machine code, that was fine because you had a big string of hex and you had a loader and you would type it in and then off it go. But if you're like trying to make some and you didn't have an assembler, well, it was kind of annoying. And it's like, well, I need to insert some stuff, insert some bytes, and where is it? I got to insert them. And it was real tedious. And so at some point I realized, well, okay, the trick, well, it knows where the basic program is. And, on the 81, it was, 16514 is that magic address. I said, well, I could just march through memory and you can find the end of a line and line number and rem statements by looking for bytes. And so I had made this thing where you just made rem statements. So the basic didn't care about them. And you made a rem statements, and then you just put in the rem like your little assembly mnemonic, load A with whatever, and then put a semicolon. And after that, you could you still had to do the hex yourself, but you just put the hex codes on the same line after it. And so my loader would just go through program memory, look for those lines, skip to the hex and load them. But then you could use the editor to insert and delete lines and move them around. Actually made it a lot easier. But I didn't have an assembler, so you do those things.
Hey, David.
Yes.
I just see we got like 20 minutes left. I just wanted to, if you can, leave me a few minutes to update something I mentioned a few meetings ago.
Cool. Yes, I'm gonna. Stewart Newfeld has a question about the 1500, and we'll go to you, Jeff.
Well, actually, Willie, who I think just left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Willie's still here?
No, he's gone.
Yeah, he had emailed me a follow-up. Last meeting, I offered to supply keyboards that cost the ones that I'm getting from Germany. And he was interested in a 1500 keyboard. I've never actually repaired a 1500 keyboard. But I just, maybe somebody who does can confirm my understanding. These keyboards that I get from Germany, from Ginger Electronics, when they're assembled, I have sold quite a few of these. I probably sold 20 of these, and they are quite tactile. This is a sandwich of a thin membrane like this, this is a Spectrum one, a Spectrum overlay. This just has the ZX81. So I do have the Spectrum one.
Oh, good.
And this is supposed to be the same size as a 1500.
Yes.
Now, so in theory, there's two ways if you have a Spectrum to repair it. In the case of a Spectrum, you could pull the keyboard out, and he does have this supplyable overlay that you could put on. But if you have a 1500, we don't have a 1500 overlay, but supposedly you can take the rubber keyboards,
Yep.
and put this behind it and should work.
Okay.
Does that seem reasonable to anybody? Does anybody ever rip those rubber keycaps, however they're made? Is that one piece, or is every little rubber? Is that a one-piece mold, TS 1500 keyboard?
Well, as far as I know, I mean, I've done the 1500. Well, I've never taken a 1500 apart, but I've taken Spectrums apart, right? The 48K, 16K Spectrums, and the rubber part of the keyboard is all one molded piece.
Oh,
And
so
the
I guess-
1500 is the same way. I have
Right.
one, but it's downstairs, I think.
So actually, that sitting over this should work. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I think the 1500 and the Spectrum, they use the same case design pretty much, especially for the keyboard part.
Yeah. Well, I
Right,
know
they-
the keyboard layout is the same.
Right.
I
Right.
just have
It's
overlay.
It's just
but
the
this-
overlay that's different, right? And
Yep.
that's kind of, and same thing with like David, I think somebody was selling them on eBay, and I picked up two of the rubber membrane, the rubber keys for the 1500 because they're unique to the 1500, right? There's
Yep.
no, I don't know where you would get those from otherwise. And I don't think anybody's ever made any, or had them made, after the fact. So, but yeah, the keyboard, the membrane, all that stuff should be identical to the Spectrum. So
All right,
anything that
well,
works on the
hopefully-
Spectrum should work on the 1500.
Okay, hopefully in a couple of weeks, Willie will tell us how it worked out.
Jeff?
Oh, okay. I just wanted to touch on something a few meetings ago. I had mentioned I had submitted the keyboard beeper thing to Timex to make, and I had mentioned I also had a project to do X10 control. And I do think there was someone in the notes that had asked to learn a little bit more about that. So kind of what Tom was saying, out of necessity, I thought I was interested in home automation, and I thought a ZX81 would be a perfect little guy to sit in the corner and turn your lights and stuff on. And I had done some work with the TRS-80 and actually the Apple II. And it started with something Radio Shack sold. I don't know if anybody's ever seen one of these, but this was their version of X10. They called it Power, whatever it was, plug-in power. And they actually built this device for the TRS-80. And it solved the number one issue, which was connecting up to the power line. It had to plug in the wall, but it connected up to the cassette in and out. And one problem with this was that all it did was let you send X10 codes to turn lights on and off. And if you know anything about the way the X10 system works, there's basically this code that has to go out on the power line that sends the information, and it has to be synchronized with the 60 hertz power. And so it used for the input to the computer just a square wave that would give you the 60 hertz to time when you would send out the signals. And I looked at it and I wanted something that would actually be two-way, where you could actually read X10 codes. And I found by opening this thing up and adding, I think, one diode, I could turn it into a bidirectional device. So not only could it send codes, but it could read codes. So you could use, for instance, an X10 handheld controller to control your computer. And again, I had modified it to work with the Apple II, and I had, basically proposed to Timex that maybe they, would want something like that. I don't think they would have built their own box, I'm sure, not, repackaged the TRS-80 boxes. But what I found was that there were some really cool things you could do with it. One of which was one of the issues with the X10 system was you basically had 16 house codes, which allowed you so that you could use one house code, your neighbor could use another, because anybody on the same power transformer could basically see the same codes. So their answer was to come up with the house codes. But I always thought, your next door neighbor, some teenage kid's bored, there's only 16 codes. He's going to go through every one of those codes and turn everything on. and you're out of town and your coffee pot goes on and your house burns down. So one of the things I had done, and I've got some articles if anyone's really interested, I had turned this into so the computer could not only sense the codes, but it could actually, if it saw someone trying to enter a code or control an appliance, it could jam the signal so it would prevent it. So it became kind of a security device as well. And you could use it either one of two modes where you prefixed every command with sort of a 3 or 4 digit code, or you had an arm and disarm code that you could use. So if you left the house, you just disarmed it and then no one could turn your stuff on. And that really intrigued me. And again, I had done this on the TRC and the Apple, but my goal for years later was to build a self-contained module that would just do it. So you didn't have to tie up a computer. And I guess in the 80s or 90s, they ran some contests for these microcontrollers. You could design a project. So I entered a couple of them, and one of them was, it resulted in this, which was just basically a plug-in module that you plug anywhere in your house, just plug it in the wall. And you programmed it with these arm and disarm codes, and it protected your whole house. You didn't have to go and have an electrician wire in a filter to your power, to your, fuse box. And I thought, again, it would be something that, X10 might have been interested in, but again, it's an American company. Everything was done with BSR in England. And so another one of my projects that never went anywhere, but it was kind of a cool thing. I built another one that would do all the 16 house codes. If you wanted to use more than one, you could jam them all. Anyway, it was just a kind of a cool thing. So if people are still interested in X10 stuff, be happy to make all the information on these projects available. I don't think anybody, well, again, like Tom said, what would you do with this computer? What could you do with it? And this was something I thought, was a perfect application for a very inexpensive computer to be put to use. So
Jeff, actually, now that you say this, I'm putting 2 and 2 together here. Willie, who signed off a little bit ago, is interested in controlling his, some of his devices from his computer. And one of the ways that he and I talked about it was just getting some. There are these like little modules that have like 2 or 4 relays on them, and then they're just 5-volt switch, so you can actually hook it up to TTL, like a TTL latch, and write to that, and it'll switch it on or switch it off or whatever. But your X10 stuff might make a lot more sense for what he wants to do than some hardwired relays.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, there were a couple ways you could do it. One approach was to use an ultrasonic transmitter and feed, the standard X10 control box. I got one here. I had to go grab my Boxo X10 stuff from the attic, but this was the standard box that most people got. It had little controls.
Yeah,
inside. And this has an ultrasonic receiver, and the remote control that came with it was ultrasonic. So if you had one of those, you could easily hook up an ultrasonic transceiver or transmitter or transducer to basically feed codes into that. That would be one way if you just wanted to control devices. There's no feedback if it actually works or not. And again, that would only be a unidirectional approach. But some people did that. There were a couple other people that actually built, I know for the Apple II, there was a board and it had this big epoxy module on there that actually plugged right into the 110. I always thought that was a little iffy, going right into your computer, but if you wanted to control it directly, that's what you had to do. And like I said, what I liked about this was that if it's a self-contained module, this thing just plugs right in and it has its own power supply that runs off the 110, and it's nothing you would do if you couldn't enclose it completely inside a module like this so that no one would touch it. So that's the third way, is just to make a self-contained kind of a thing. And then if he wants to, again, I don't know how much trouble you'd have finding one of these, but this is actually a really cool device. And I'd look it up, but again, it's such a simple modification, which of course then voids all the UL, certification anyway. But
and the warranty, and the
warranty, yes,
of course, go sue Radio Shack. But in any case, just to have the ability to go two-way, like I said, I used to demonstrate programs on the Apple that I would just control with the remote. You could use it like if you're doing a speech and you want to change slides or something. Anyway, stuff that was really cool back then that nowadays no one would ever think of doing. But anyway, like I said, I did a couple write-ups for these contests, just showing how I could use these little microcontrollers to, I did another one that has an LCD display on it. So as you're typing codes on the X10, it reads them out for you.
Wow.
And so anyway, it was kind of a fun thing. And it was something I was interested back then. Now it's all sitting in a box that is going to go back up in the closet. But happy to help if people are still interested in that. And like I said, the write-ups I have, which explain everything from how X10 works to how this jamming circuit works, are all in there.
Cool. Tim H wants to know what micro you used.
This was for the COP. Let me see if I can. There was a COP flash contest. Does anybody remember what that was?
Oh my God, the national
Semiconductor.
Yeah. Then there was this guy. This was the Cornelius Van Drebbel's Mad Design Contest, December 2004. Does that ring a bell, anybody?
Is that for nuts and bolts?
No, I did a lot for nuts and bolts, but this was again, I'll tell you who's, this was the NEC, the UPD 780338. Because one of the reasons I did these was when they ran these contests, they would basically, you sent in a proposal for what you wanted to do, and they would send you these like design kits, which were, I think I have one. Let's see if this one, I don't know which one this was based, but they would send you this part. And I would take that with the LCD display and everything, and I would tack on a little power supply and then the guts from an X10 module to talk to the power line. And I won't tell you what all the destruction I did hooking up a device running, that has basically line 110 volts on one leg. You can't really hook it up to program it with your computer while it's still hooked up to the 110. But in any case, the other one was the COP flash. That was I think that was
National Semiconductor.
Yeah. So I've got both of those write-ups. This one was based on this was the one based on the COP flash. So and again, it was just a fun thing to do, to play with their design kit and learn their their software, the assemblers and all that kind of stuff. So I had a lot of fun doing that.
Does anybody, I mean, of course, like you said, these days, nobody would really power stuff over the power line anymore, because they have a wireless equivalent to that kind of replaced X10. I can't remember. The name is on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember what they call that.
Well, there's the Zigbee, but there's still a lot of stuff.
Zigbee.
But
some other ones.
They still run on the power line, though. There's a lot of stuff that still uses power line transmission, which again is just which is just basically, I hate to say RF, it's only 30 kilohertz, but it's on it runs across the power lines, just like the old intercoms. Some of the, I think there were some intercoms that use the same kind of technology. But yeah, nowadays everything is is Wi-Fi connected, so
or wireless.
Yeah, Bluetooth, I suppose, maybe, but no, I think that the majority, I mean, you can buy a little plug now that plugs in the wall that connects to your Wi-Fi. It's probably $10-15, and you control it from your phone, or any other,
I guess I'm kind of mentioning it because recently they had to come to my house to replace my my thing in my alarm panel because it was 3G, and of course 3G is going away now, so they had to upgrade it to 4G. But anyway, in that wireless module also has, like you said, I think it's Zigbee or something, but it's a to control those home automation things from the alarm panel. But it's all done. It's not over the AC line, I don't believe, because that's a wireless transceiver that's in there for that wire, that protocol. I don't know if it's Zigbee. That sounds. I mean, I know. What's that? Z-Wave.
Z-Wave's another one. Yeah, Z-Wave.
Yeah, Z-Wave. Maybe it was Z-Wave, but it's a wireless protocol that doesn't use the AC line, right? But it controls. You can lock and unlock your door or do other things home automation wise with the alarm panel. But like I said, I think that's kind of where that went to. So it might be interesting to. I don't know. I'm not a big home automation guy myself, but it'd be kind of interesting to see somebody might have come up with something like you did, that you could see commands going out, you could see commands going in, and you could write your own commands, from some kind of computer interface or something like that.
Yeah.
And the security of that, right? I don't know. I mean, I imagine it's more secure than than X10 ever would be.
Well, that was the thing with X10 on the power line is, you had
Right.
it's like an apartment building, you might have 20 people in an apartment.
Right.
And all you could do is hope that, they picked a different house code than yours. And I just thought that was not
That was
great.
crazy. Yeah.
But yeah, there's that stuff. I don't think they sell X10 stuff anymore. But back then that was the
that
premier
was
way
right.
of controlling stuff.
I remember seeing those all the time when I went to Radio Shack as a kid. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
So
I still got 6 of them and 3 controllers.
Yeah. Those old timers, man. These newfangled kids, they wouldn't. What is that? You do what with that?
Hey, David, I think we have about just a couple of minutes to do the unfinished business here.
Thank you. So 2 weeks hence is Father's Day, and I suspect that some people, wish to participate in those activities, get some, poorly made meals or whatever it is that happens on those days. So let's do Sunday in 3 weeks, and I'll send out, a little reminder about that shortly after, like this week, and then I'll send another reminder closer to the time frame. And that'll be on Sunday at 2 p.m. Easter time.
Mm-hmm. Very funny, very funny.
We knew what you meant.
And for the folks on the West Coast, that'll be an ungodly early hour of the morning. And Adam mentioned something that I had mentioned to him. So I do all of my work on my website on a local web server on my computer, and I run WordPress, and I've got all this stuff, right? And I have been using this program to I use an FTP program to copy over all the files that have changed since the last time, and then a database export program to copy over the database. And I finally hit the limit of my publication web server with a 10, this is a compressed database, a 10 megabyte compressed database. So uncompressed, I think it's something like 50 megs of data tables, right? MySQL data behind the website. And it caused the website to go down for a couple of days. But I found what I consider to be a fantastic solution, and that is a plugin in WordPress that I run, and it exports the entire website as static HTML files. And the beauty of static HTML files is that they are secure. Nobody can hack into the website, and they are super, super fast to serve to your web browser. So if you have gone to a web page in my website that was kind of slow in the past, and let me share my screen. Losing track of where I am. Here we go. Okay. If you've gone to a page that was a little slow in the past, and the perfect example of that would be the company's page, it might have taken a couple seconds to draw this page. It might have taken a minute or two to draw this page, depending upon the status of the cached version of the web page. And now, because it's static HTML, it just happens almost instantly. One of the other things that I got out of that was prior to this, because of the way it's coded, if you went to like the products page, or especially if you went to the hardware or software page, it was just a list of the sections. And now if you go there, it's still a list of the section, but it's a little fancier because it's got, pictures and a tiny bit of description. But really what you're going to experience is just that it is, I'm going to go down to Sync, because Sync is a big magazine. Here we go. You go to Sync and it loads up everything, right? It loads up all the issues. How many articles were there? 461 articles published in Sync magazine over its run. So life is faster. You can go in here and you can go to, I got to move my little chat thing. There we go. You go to the search. All right, I got to move my chat up to the top of the screen. There we go. You can go to search and that's not what it should have done.
It's only doing it because it's live, David. Don't worry.
It's only doing it because it's live. That's exactly right.
I had to do a demo.
And I'm doing a demo. I wonder why it's doing that. That's awesome. All right, let me just see if I can. Let's see what happens. I don't think, yeah, that's not going to work. Oh, that's fascinating. This worked earlier today. Oh, there we go.
I actually used it earlier today. So
Yeah, there we go. That's got the right search icon on it. I'll have to figure out why that other page doesn't. Okay.
Huh.
Well, what that means is I have to run off a new copy. So if you go in here and you type in.
Yeah, but David, I don't, the thing I don't understand is, I understand the concept of taking a website. There are some programs that you can use. I think they're not even necessarily WordPress specific. They'll just crawl your site and turn all the code that gets fetched into a static site.
Yep.
But your search function needs your database.
Nope. So I'm using the Google search. I plugged in a Google search.
Oh,
so you'll see ads. You'll see ads at the top of the search, but it's also just really, really fast because it's a Google search. So if I type in zebra, 344 results across the site. That's not unsurprising considering how many little pieces of zebra information there are. And because of the way it exports it exports all the tags as individual pages. It exports all the pages as pages. There's something like almost 30,000 pages in the site. Anyway, the upshot is it works a whole lot faster now. I still have to figure out why it's not exporting the right menus, but that's another minor detail. So it's just past 11, which means I'm going to bed.
Time to say goodnight.
So before we go really quick, I don't know
Yeah.
if we, this can't really be, I don't know that anybody really buys any Timex stuff anymore, but it's kind of cool that I picked up something I have a Google or an eBay, favorite search on. So I get, every morning I get, things from eBay.
Yeah.
And probably about 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, somebody was selling a flight simulator cartridge for the 1000, well, for the 1500, obviously.
Really?
For the 1510, yeah. And I had bid on it, and I was like, well, I'll bid. I don't know. I think I bid maybe like 170, 180 bucks for it, is what I said.
Whoa.
But somebody even outbid me, because I kind of left it alone, and then I came back and checked it, and it was like, I think it went up to like 560 bucks. I think is what somebody paid for it, which is which is kind of ridiculous on the one hand, but then again, it's not, because those things are pretty rare. I mean, I don't.
No, it's ridiculous on
I've
both
ever
hands,
seen-
Carl. It's ridiculous on both hands.
I mean, for me, that's to me, it's kind of important because that's the only cartridge that I know of that nobody's ripped yet, right?
Yeah.
There's no, the other 3 cartridges, we have the ROMs. You can download them and put them in your emulator or whatever. Flight Simulator is the one that we don't. Well, anyway, the other, I think this was last week, before I went to bed, I was checking and hey, somebody else was selling a Flight Simulator cartridge. So I was like, okay, I took a look at it, and it's in the box. It came in the box.
Hold it closer to you.
Yeah, there you go.
Well,
Perfect.
Yeah. It came in the box. It's got a Skaggs price on it. Looks like there's a red, it probably was on closeout or something, but that got torn off. But it was $20, $19.99. Skaggs. I know here in New Mexico, or Albuquerque, we had a place called Skaggs Alpha Beta, right? Which was like an Albertsons or one of those kind of stores, and that's kind of where the Timex stuff was sold, right? I think I bought mine at Albertsons, actually, my Timex 1000 originally. And not only that, but so yeah, it comes in the box. It came with the manual. Got the nice manual with it.
Well, how much? Okay, drop us the price.
Well, the other thing is he also included the tape. It's the Flight Simulator tape, right? That's got, so it does have the
inlay.
Well, I put it in here. Yeah, it does have the cassette in there, and it does have the manual that goes in there, and of course the Flight Simulator cartridge, right? So But the price of it was, he had it for $60, buy it now. And I said, holy crap.
Oh, yeah.
I just bought that right away.
Boom.
That
Nice.
reminds me of
So,
a story that I had where I was at another hobby I had is wargaming. At a gaming convention, it's a flea market. There's a game I want. I really want it. Another guy wants it also. So we keep bidding and bidding and bidding and bidding. Finally, I get it. About 5 minutes later, up comes another copy.
Mhm.
And I already
Yeah.
had mine. So he got his super cheap.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was I didn't think I'd ever see this again. And like I said, just like a week or two later, this pops up. And not only that, but it's got, I think the other one didn't have the box. I think it was just maybe the cartridge. I have to look at the eBay listing, but so I'm super hyped that
Did
I
you
got
burn it?
this because it's the whole, it's the whole package, right? And so now I got to just figure out how I can rip the, the ROM out of it.
You have the
get it.
hardware, right? Like, or do you need to borrow? my
I do,
burner?
I do,
Yeah.
I do have the hardware, but it's not so simple as plugging it into the computer and ripping it. I got to hook it up to one of my programmers, and so that'll take a little bit. But at least now I have the cartridge, and then I can compare. I even got the tape, which is kind of cool. I might have the tape somewhere with my 1000 stuff, but that's just a small price to pay for the tape too, right? So you got both versions, because this kind of ties into my whole thing where I want to try and make it easier for people to create cartridges, right, for the 1000, 1500. And so this will kind of maybe help me to see how, because obviously flight simulators machine code.
Yeah.
And there might be a small basic header or something like that starts it. I don't know. I can't remember. But at least this way I may be able to see what they did to turn it into a cartridge, since I have the tape version as well.
That's awesome.
So I can compare the, I don't think the code's any different, but it's just how does it get started, right? Because we all know the ROM for the cartridge for the 1500 starts at 8K to 16K. That's where it resides in the memory map. But the 1500s ROM was a little bit modified, which I can't remember the guy's name that wrote that code for it that
Will
we
Collin.
talked to.
Yeah.
And so it checks that memory location. If there's a 1 there, hey, there's a cartridge there, so that it just jumps right to the cartridge and auto starts it, which the 1000s don't have, right? You have to actually type in random user 8192 and it'll start it. So you can still use the cartridge, and it's all explained in the 1510 cartridge accessory manual, right? It talks about that to start it on a 1000 or a ZX81. But anyway, I kind of wanted to I don't know if anybody else has any kind of stuff that they've bought like that they've kind of wanted, and I don't think so, because I don't know how many of you guys are kind of looking for stuff like that to add to your collection.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got my holy grail items too. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean,
David, don't tell anyone what they are. Don't tell him, especially. I mean,
well, no. It's really, so all right. So there was a version of Profile on the cartridge. It's called like Profile 5 or something. And that's sort of my holy grail for databases on the 2068, because it gives you all the RAM basically for your data, like 27K or almost 30 something K versus the 27 that's available for the cartridge version. Plus, it's an AROS. It's a basic program on a cartridge, which is the thing that just sort of fascinates me.
And that was a Timex cartridge?
No, it was Tom Woods.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was nothing that I ever developed.
Oh, really? I wonder who did that then.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. The mystery deepens.
You probably had an eye patch.
The mystery
Interesting.
Mystery deepens.
Were you aware that cartridge existed?
No, we did put Profile on cartridge, but it was never really sold, and it was never called Profile 5.
Okay. All right. Well, see, this is perfect for having you on. you give me the little details.
Yeah, and it's just something else too. I noticed somebody in Portugal, they must have bought like a used computer store, and they have a bunch of, it looks like original Timex stuff from Portugal.
Yeah.
And somebody's trying to sell the 1510 cartridge adapter, from Portugal. It's got all the papers you can see in the pictures, but he's got like a buyout, right? He doesn't have where you can bid on it, but I think he started it out like $670, and it's worked its way down, I think, into the 500s now. But that's just ridiculous for that. And then I think somebody else had one, like I said, and they might have sold it for, I don't know, it's $200 or something like that. It's still kind of a rare thing to find, but somebody's willing to. I don't think obviously nobody's willing to pay $600 for it.
I did see that.
But $200 definitely seems like it's in the realm of possibility for that thing. It's so rare, and I haven't seen any of the joysticks.
600 Singapore dollars.
Yeah, right. Well, I think all the markets are down now, right? All the exchange rates are kind of are crap now, but yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring that up, and I don't know if anybody else, like I said, has like a found something recently that they've wanted for a while, and like I said, I don't think so, but I just thought I'd bring that up. And
Hey, Carl, I just want to say that I put in the not the show notes, what do you call them, the chat,
Chat,
link to that video that we made I don't know, a couple months back now when you came
right
over.
right
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, where you
Good.
showed off your cartridge adapter.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure
In
that
fact,
ends
you'll
up.
have to come over here so I can see your actual cartridge now that I think about it.
Yeah.
We'll make a video and we'll just show it to everyone. We'll be
Well,
like, look at us, look what we've
and
got.
again, I have to appreciate Dave sending me the states and capitals, right? Because I had no cartridge for the 1510 at all.
So you've gone
Right,
from
so
nothing to many.
To two, right? So
Two,
I have
okay.
50% of them. And like I said, I don't really care to get the other two. Not like I said, if I could get the ROM, then that would be fine for me. But it is obviously nice to have the cartridge itself, because it is a different color, right? The 2068 cartridges are black colored.
Yeah.
And the 1510 cartridges are obviously, I don't know, it's a beige, brownish colored. And then they have the different pin locations, right? The cutouts. So you can't put the cartridges physically are the same, but you can't, it'll block you from putting it into 2068 and vice versa. So because of the cutout on the circuit board.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you, Tom Woods, for joining us.
Yes,
It's
been
been
great.
wonderful. And
Thank you for having me.
and I'll, if you don't mind, I'll keep sending you, the meeting notices, and you can drop in whenever you'd like.
Please do.
Awesome.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Have a
All
great
right.
night.
Have a good one, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.